In 1976, it was thought we were on the brink of another major flu outbreak. Medical science appeared to be prepared. The experts planned to use their best weapon yet, prevention with the flu vaccine. 500 soldiers in Fort Dix, New Jersey came down with the flu in February of 1976. Private David Lewis died, and it was determined that he had suffered from swine flu. At the time, it was feared that approximately 500 other soldiers on the base were ill with the same strain of influenza, and the alarm was sounded. It was a swine flu that had felled an estimated 20 million people in the great pandemic of 1918. In March 76, President Gerald Ford announced the biggest immunization program in history.
This virus was the cause of a pandemic in 1918 and 1919 that resulted in over 500,000 deaths in the United States.
Ford's intention was to vaccinate every man, woman, and child in the United States. Vaccine was rushed into production and imported in great quantities. The cost was to be about $135 million. The first Americans were inoculated in Indianapolis on October 1st, 1976. Even though there were no confirmed cases in Canada, the government decided to participate in the program, and the first batch of vaccine was delivered on November 1st. The first public swine flu clinic opened 3 weeks later. From the beginning, the program was criticized for being hastily implemented and unnecessary. But over 50 million people in North America were inoculated at a cost of $100 million before investigators discovered an apparent increase in a rare paralytic disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome among the recently vaccinated. This and the fact that the epidemic failed to materialize led to a quick end to the vaccination program in December 1976.
Researchers and experts now fear that the failure of the swine flu epidemic to materialize in 76 will have detrimental effects on preparations for future pandemics. Dr. Arthur Silverstein was an advisor to the U.S. Senate Health Committee in 1976 and has written a book about the swine flu scare. Dr. Silverstein, you called your book about the experiences of 76 pure politics, impure science. Why is that the right image for those experiences?
I think it's the right image because whereas one still didn't then and still doesn't know all that much about the science of influenza virus, one knows a fair amount about how politics works in Washington. And politics worked very smoothly, although the science did not in the 76 flu outbreak.
Looking back, was there any justification for mobilizing the medical, scientific, and political forces that were mobilized in 76? Do you remember the scare? Was it justified at all?
Well, I think it was justified. Whether the entire scare was or not is a little difficult to say. In retrospect, it's easy, but at the time it was very difficult. I think it was justified in this respect, that the scientists, based on what they then knew about influenza virus and influenza disease, I think had every right to expect that there was a fairly good probability that a dangerous influenza pandemic would sweep the world, and that there was time to get ready and practice preventive medicine.
Let's turn to the politics, because you blame Gerald Ford's need to be reelected for what he then went on to do.
Politics did play a role, as it does in almost everything that goes on in Washington. The fact that it was a presidential election year wasn't overpowering, but it did have an effect. I think that's part of the reason why the question itself on whether to get the United States government into the influenza vaccine business finally reached the president's desk. It was an election year, he was running, there was a sense in the country that he was sort of wishy-washy and indecisive, and this was a good way to show that he was decisive and he could act on an issue of importance.
Dr. Silverstein, if we were wrong in 76, were we at least in that experience able to prove that we can mobilize adequately? Were this shift that everyone thinks could be coming in the next year or two to appear, could we mobilize enough vaccine, do you think, to protect a population?
I think we can. We've learned some valuable lessons, or at least I hope we've learned some valuable lessons from that 76 affair. One of the lessons is that we can do it, but we have to take a little more care with the progression of events that we exercise. There has to be points at which one stops if flu doesn't come back, if it's not serious, if it doesn't kill people, if it's going to be benign. There have to be clear signals about when to produce and when to start immunizing.
Let me ask you about the vaccine itself, because
Yes.
what also so damaged that campaign, and what maybe people are most worried about, is because of the paralysis syndrome that afflicted 500 people who got the vaccine. People are afraid that in the future even a killer flu won't get us worried enough to take the risk of the vaccine itself.
I think that's a misperception. One of the reasons I wrote this book was to make a plea for governmental continuation of efforts in this area. I happen to think, as I think most virologists believe, that there will be a major antigenic shift, and sooner or later there will come another worldwide pandemic, and that we should get ready. The reason I wrote the book is that heads rolled as a result of what they call the fiasco, the swine flu fiasco of '76. That is, that the director of the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta was fired. The Assistant Secretary for Health in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was let go. And I'm afraid that government officials will not act out of fear for making a mistake the next time.